Imagine this. You walk into a room and everyone's already staring at you like you don't belong. But it gets better. The boss, the guy who's supposed to stand for justice, spits in your face and orders your arrest. He thought that was the end of it, that he'd put me in my place for good. But that day changed everything, and what happened next turned his world upside down forever. Let's start from the beginning. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and everyone just stops what they're doing to stare at you? Yeah, that's exactly what happened the second I stepped foot into the precinct. And trust me, it wasn't because I was some celebrity undercover. It was the kind of look you get when people have already decided you don't belong. Let me backtrack for a second. My name's Malcolm Carter, 32 years old. And yeah, I'm an FBI agent. Pretty cool title, right? Except when you're walking into a place like this where that badge on your chest doesn't mean squat. I was here on a mission, but the second I walked in, I knew this was going to be a long day. The precinct was loud, chaotic, and reeked of stale coffee and bad decisions. Desks were piled with papers no one cared to file, and the officers looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I spotted him almost immediately, Major Randall Brooks. Tall, broad, with a jawline sharp enough to cut steel, but an attitude so sour you could taste it from across the room. He was leaning back in his chair, barking orders like he owned the place. Technically, he kinda did. I barely made it 3 steps before he noticed me. His eyes locked on mine, and I swear, the entire room went silent. It was like a scene out of a bad movie, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. "Who the hell are you?" he barked, standing up and crossing his arms like he was ready to throw me out himself. "Malcolm Carter," I said, keeping my tone calm. "I'm with the Bureau. I was assigned here temporarily." Brooks raised an eyebrow, the corners of his mouth twisting into a smirk that made my skin crawl. "The Bureau, huh? Well, congratulations on your little promotion, Agent Carter," he said, putting way too much emphasis on the word. "But around here, that doesn't mean much." I could feel the tension in the room thickening, like everyone was holding their breath. Brooks took a step closer, his boots echoing on the floor. "You know," he said, eyeing me up and down, "you remind me of someone we had in here last week. Real piece of work. Thought he could run things his way too." Then, out of nowhere, he spit in my face. Yeah, you heard me right. This grown man, a supposed leader of the department, just spat at me like I was some kind of insect on his windshield. The room erupted into muffled gasps and awkward shuffling. Some of the officers looked away, pretending not to notice, while others just stood there, frozen. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, my jaw tightening. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to react, to put him in his place. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. Brooks grinned, clearly enjoying the little scene he'd created. "Arrest him," he said casually, waving his hand like he was ordering a coffee. "Let him cool off in a cell for a while. Maybe that'll teach him some respect." 2 officers hesitated before stepping forward. One of them, a younger guy who couldn't have been older than 25, looked at me like he was apologizing with his eyes. The other just grabbed my arm without a word. "Is this really necessary?" the younger one asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Brooks turned on him so fast it was like watching a storm roll in. "You questioning my authority, officer? Do your job, or I'll find someone who will." They led me down the hall to a small, dingy interrogation room. The walls were a depressing shade of gray, and the single bulb, hanging from the ceiling, flickered just enough to be annoying. They didn't bother cuffing me, which was probably their version of a kindness. I sat down, trying to keep my breathing steady. My mind was racing, not with fear, but with calculation. This was exactly what I'd come here for. Brooks had just handed me the proof I needed on a silver platter. But man, it took every ounce of self-control not to let him know that. The door creaked open, and in walked Brooks, his smug expression firmly in place. He leaned against the table, looming over me like a villain straight out of a comic book. "So, Agent Carter," he said, dragging out the words like he was savoring them, "what brings you to my precinct?" I didn't answer. Not because I couldn't, but because I wanted to see how far he'd take this little power trip. "Well," he continued, clearly unfazed by my silence, "it doesn't really matter. People like you always think they're above the law. Guess what? You're not. And in here, I'm the law." He stood up straight, cracking his knuckles for effect. "You should have stayed in your lane, Carter. Now you're just another guy who doesn't know when to quit." I stared at him, my face giving nothing away. He had no idea who he was messing with, and honestly, that was his first mistake. Sitting in that tiny, dimly lit room felt like being trapped inside a bad crime drama. The walls were practically screaming, "This place hasn't seen a fresh coat of paint since the 80s." The single flickering bulb above me was just the cherry on top of this misery cake. I leaned back in the uncomfortable metal chair, trying not to laugh at how cliché the whole setup was. It was like these guys wanted to make a statement. We're tough, we don't care about your comfort, and we definitely don't know what upgrades mean. The door creaked open and in strutted Major Brooks, looking smugger than ever. He closed the door behind him with a little too much drama, like he was trying to intimidate me with the sound. Spoiler alert, it wasn't working. "Well, well, well," he said, dragging out every word like he was auditioning for a bad TV villain. "Here you are, Agent Carter. Or should I say temporary agent, because you're not sticking around here for long." I raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything. Silence is golden, especially when the other guy can't handle it. Sure enough, Brooks couldn't. "You think you're special, don't you?" He continued, pacing the room like he was delivering a monologue. "Walking in here with your fancy badge, acting like you're better than us." "Actually," I said, finally breaking my silence, "I didn't say a word about being better than anyone. That's all you, Major." His face twisted into something between a scowl and a grin, like he couldn't decide whether to be offended or amused. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said, leaning on the table so he was right in my face. "But guts won't get you far in my precinct. You're just another guy who doesn't know his place." I tilted my head, pretending to think about his words. "And you're just another guy who thinks yelling makes him important. We all have our quirks, I guess." That hit a nerve. Brooks straightened up so fast I thought he might knock the chair over. "Listen here," he snapped, pointing a finger at me like I was a kid caught stealing candy. "People like you don't last long in this line of work. You'll slip up, and when you do, I'll be right there to watch you fall." "People like me?" I repeated, my voice calm but sharp. "Care to elaborate on that, Major? Or are you just throwing around vague insults for fun?" For a second, I thought he might actually say something incriminating, but instead, he just smirked. "You're not worth the explanation." Before I could respond, the door swung open again. This time it was Officer Daniels, the younger cop who'd been there when Brooks decided to play dictator in the bullpen. He looked nervous, glancing between me and Brooks like he was interrupting something dangerous. "Major," Daniels said, his voice shaky but firm. "There's someone here to see you. The Colonel." Brooks froze, his bravado slipping just enough for me to notice. "The Colonel?" he repeated, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. "What does he want?" Daniels hesitated. "He didn't say, sir, just that it's urgent." Brooks grumbled under his breath and stormed out of the room, leaving the door wide open. Daniels lingered for a moment, looking like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Finally, he just gave me a quick nod and followed Brooks out. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. The Colonel showing up wasn't part of my plan, but it definitely added a new twist. I had no idea what Brooks was about to walk into, but one thing was clear: his day was about to get a lot more interesting. I sat there staring at the open door like it was some sort of portal to chaos. The sound of boots stomping down the hallway echoed back into the room. Brooks was gone, and honestly, I wasn't sure whether to be relieved or disappointed. On the one hand, his absence meant I didn't have to endure another round of his dollar store villain routine. On the other hand, I knew whatever was happening outside was about to flip this whole situation upside down. A few minutes later, the door creaked open again, and this time, Colonel Stanton walked in. Now, let me tell you, Stanton wasn't the type to play around. His posture screamed authority, and his eyes had this no-nonsense intensity that made you want to sit up a little straighter, even if you weren't in trouble. "Agent Carter," he said, nodding slightly. "How are you holding up?" I shrugged, keeping my tone casual. "Well, considering I got an impromptu invite to a holding cell by your finest, I'd say I've been better." Stanton smirked, the kind of smirk that said he knew exactly what was going on, but was letting it play out for the sake of the bigger picture. "I've been briefed on your progress here. Sounds like you've already uncovered some interesting behavior." "Oh, you mean Brooks' Oscar-worthy performance earlier?" "Yeah, he's been a real gem," I said, crossing my arms. "Pretty sure he'd make a great case study for Power Tripping 101. Stanton nodded, his face serious again. "We suspected as much. That's why you're here." But now it's time to take this operation to the next step. Before I could ask what he meant, Brooks stormed back into the room, his face redder than a stop sign. He was followed by Daniels, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Brooks' eyes darted between me and Stanton, and I could tell he was trying to piece together what was happening. "Colonel," Brooks started, his voice tight with barely restrained anger, "I don't understand why this agent is being treated like he's above protocol. He's causing disruption in my precinct." Stanton didn't even blink. "Major Brooks, sit down." The command was so sharp and final that Brooks froze for a moment, before reluctantly pulling out a chair. His jaw was clenched, and his hands were gripping the edge of the table like he was trying to keep himself grounded. Stanton placed a file on the table and slid it toward Brooks. "Do you know what this is?" Brooks glanced at it but didn't touch it. "Should I?" "It's a record of complaints filed against you," Stanton said, his tone calm but cutting. "Allegations of misconduct, abuse of power, and discrimination. And as of today, we've added one more incident to that list." Brooks' eyes flicked toward me, his expression shifting from anger to something closer to panic. "This is ridiculous. You're going to take the word of an outsider over mine?" Stanton raised an eyebrow. "This outsider is an FBI agent conducting an internal investigation. And from what I've seen so far, he's doing an excellent job." The room went silent. Daniels looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, while Brooks was practically vibrating with suppressed rage. "I've done nothing wrong," Brooks said finally, his voice low and defensive. "This is all just a misunderstanding." "Oh, it's definitely a misunderstanding," I said, leaning forward. "You misunderstood how much you could get away with before someone caught on." Brooks turned to Stanton, his tone desperate now. "Colonel, you can't seriously believe this. He's just trying to make me look bad." Stanton didn't waver. "The evidence speaks for itself, Major, and I suggest you start cooperating because this investigation isn't over yet." The color drained from Brooks' face. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked genuinely unsure of himself. It was a small victory, but it felt like a big one. Stanton stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "Daniels, escort Major Brooks to his office. I'll be meeting with the department heads shortly to discuss the next steps." Daniels nodded quickly, gesturing for Brooks to follow him. Brooks hesitated, throwing one last glare in my direction before stomping out of the room. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving just me and Stanton. "Well," Stanton said, breaking the silence, "I'd say that went about as expected." I couldn't help but chuckle. "You've got a knack for understatement, Colonel." Stanton allowed himself a brief smile. "Finish your report, Agent Carter. We're going to need it for the formal proceedings." As he left the room, I leaned back in my chair, finally letting myself relax. The mission wasn't over yet, but for the first time, it felt like the tide was turning. Brooks had made his move, and now it was my turn to play the long game. What would you do if you were in Agent Carter's shoes? How would you handle a power-hungry figure like Brooks? Share your thoughts and let us know if you or someone you know has ever experienced something similar. Let's start a conversation. Don't forget to hit the like button if this story resonated with you and share it to spread the message. This story was created to shed light on real-world issues and to inspire positive change. Together, we can make the world a better place by standing against injustice. Your opinion matters. Let's make a difference.